as we get into, as you're evaluating the case, either from the plaintiff side or from the defense side, is to talk with the data custodians. Do it early. Do it while you're still assessing the case. And so when you talk to those custodians, you have to ask yourselves, what is going to be important at the end of this case? What sort of data is going to be important at the end of this case? What sort of information is going to be important at the end of this case? And then go to your clients and ask them where that's stored. So, does your client have a huge email farm? Great. They have a small email farm. Great. Who controls that data? Is it in-house? Is it an external vendor? Talk to those people. And once you talk to those people, ask them where other stuff is. And as you identify these data custodians, the one thing that you need to make sure that you do is if you know that litigation is pending or you've already received a litigation hold, give them that litigation hold letter or write a notice to them so that they know what they're saving. Go ahead.
Who here knows what a litigation hold is? Who's heard that phrase? Who's written a preservation letter and sent it out? Excellent. Who uses the same preservation letter every single time? Okay. Litigation hold goes both towards your other party's data, of course, the adversary's data, but it also goes to your own client's data. So the litigation hold is generally what happens with your client and the company that you're representing. Or if it's just one single person, you still have the same duty to talk to them about what data they have. So if they've got a home computer, or they've got a cell phone, or they've got an iPad, talk to them about that. Figure out where that information is. There could be a juicy nugget in there that helps your case, but there also could be something in there that you need to turn over to the other side. So make sure that you're doing both. As for preservation letters that you're sending to the other side, please put a little bit more care and effort into those preservation letters. Don't assume that the other side knows what you want by that letter. Just by sending this letter that says, I want you to hold on to all the data from this date to this date pertaining to this matter. It's not generally enough. Give them some direction as to what you're going to be looking for, what you're going to be requesting, why that's pertinent and why it's important. Because if they don't adhere to that preservation letter and it gets in front of a judge months from now, you want to be able to have that letter and say, Your Honor, I laid it out specifically, and I give it to them word for word. I invited them to call me if they had questions, and they didn't do it. Use that as a tool to make sure that you're keeping that other side in check, and hopefully at the end of the day, you get what you're asking for. And keep in mind that it goes both ways. If you're going to be asking for that information, be prepared to present that information as well.
And I have one other question. I have one question for everybody. How many of you in your litigation letter, your litigation hold letters, ask for them to preserve both active data and inactive data? Trust me, I don't know it either. That being said, be cognizant and know the difference between active and inactive data. Now the difference between active and inactive data, we could talk for a whole hour, or probably a whole day, about the difference between active and inactive data. Leave it be said, most of what we think of as data that we want to discover is going to be active data. But the case law suggests, and the majority rule is, that if you don't specify inactive data as part of your litigation hold, they have no obligation to preserve inactive data. So if you're concerned about data that's migrated off, or is damaged, or something that may be on a backup tape somewhere, no, a backup tape isn't what you think it is. I'd love to go there. Lean's going to give me the hook to pull me off safe if I start to. But if you're concerned about data that's migrated off, that's very old, you have to ask if they preserve it, otherwise they don't want to ever do so.
But have a purpose for it. Don't add it to your boilerplate language and say, I want inactive data. You have to have a reason for it. And generally, there are small matters that deleted data is pertinent. So just make sure that there's a reason for asking for it. Otherwise, if you go in front of the judge and they haven't saved it, the judge is going to ask you, well, why is that even important? It's not relevant. So keep that in mind.
litigation. So now you're in a lawsuit, and you're, a lot of times, and myself included, sometimes you're in a panic. You're like, oh my gosh, what sort of data do I need? What sort of data do I have to turn over? How's this all going to work? And what process am I going to use to do it? And the long and the short of it is, there isn't necessarily one right way, and there isn't necessarily a fixed way that you do eDiscovery. And like any discovery, you've got to be flexible with how you handle it. And so long as what you do is legally defensible, reasonable, if you try and be efficient about it, if the burden that you're placing on the other side is proportionate to the gain you expect to get, whether it's auditable, meaning that you can document why you're doing the certain things that you're doing and where it's coming from, and keeping track of that data, how it gets there, you've got to keep a chain of custody. Even though you can have broad discovery requests, they have to be sufficiently tailored to get the information that you're going to need. And one of the duties as a discovery party, if you're asking the other side for discovery, you have the duty to help them mitigate the risks. So think about these things as you're talking to the other side. And that will make it very much easier. Now, and one of the ways that you can do help with eDiscovery, help make it easier for everybody, is from the outset, is make your Rule 26 conference more than just a pro forma deal. A lot of times, I've been to a number of 26 conferences where, we just sort of sit there, we look at each other, and we just say, how are you going to do eDiscovery? We'll turn over stuff. But if you get up there in front, if you know your data custodians ahead of time, if you know the technology that you're working with ahead of time, and you communicate that with the other side, and you guys are upfront and honest with each other at the Rule 26 conference, and you fill out that Form 52 report, you can make life a whole lot easier for everybody. You can save your corporate clients, whether or not you're a plaintiff from the defendant side, you can save everybody. Because just be straight up front and honest with each other, and you'll be able to make things a whole lot easier for everybody, and that will help at the end of the day.
All right. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about this model. There's a website that is a whole host of information that I would encourage you to go to when you get back to your offices to learn more about what we're talking about today and more about this model. What this is the electronic discovery reference model. And it looks like it's a linear model, but it's not. It's not meant to be that way. You're going to be experiencing different parts of this model during your case. One case might include everything. One case might just include, some identification, a little bit of review, and some production. But it's good to know that there are many aspects that you need to cover and consider when going through the electronic discovery reference model. And throughout this, think of both views, both your party's data and the other party's data. And think about what you're going to be doing with your client and what the other side probably should be doing with their client's data. And that's going to help you create your arguments. If you aren't getting what you're requesting, that's going to help build your argument of understanding where the breakdown was. What happened? Did they not preserve? Is that why they didn't produce what you asked for? That's a big deal. Judge Schreier will talk about this spoliation part of non-preservation. So right now I'm going to talk about information management, which kind of goes back to the really ugly slide that I was talking about earlier. But this is more now case specific. You're sitting down with your single client and talking about whatever data they may have subject to their case. Or if you're working with a larger company, you're sitting down with the CEO or you're sitting down with the president and you're bringing in the IT guy. And you might be bringing in human resources so you can get to know a little bit more about this company. And what better people to talk to about the data than the people that are using the data? It's very important to make a group effort and collaborate and cooperate with these people to really get to the nuts and bolts of how they use data in their cases. A couple of things to consider. If they do have good information management practices, there may be a data map. might be something where you can look at, you see all the custodians, you get to see that, Susan is using an iPad and she's also allowed to use a laptop. And then they may have a bring your own device policy where she gets to use her own device for both work and personal purposes, which we could talk about the pros and cons of that to the day is long, but it's something to consider. So while you're talking to those people, learn about their structure, but also learn about their policies. One of the biggest things to think about, and one of the first questions out of your mouth when you talk to IT or when you talk to a company, is if they have auto-delete policies. The moment that a triggering event happens, there's going to be, well, the way that data works is that it could be user manipulated and it could be just system manipulated without anyone even knowing. And so acknowledging that there may be, for instance, an email server. Once something's deleted from the computer, it may sit there for a certain amount of time. But because there's only so much space on that server, it may flush out after 30 days. If that's the case, and that deleted email may have been potentially relevant, you have that duty to preserve that email before that auto-delete policy. So be cognizant that there are certain policies that companies may be using on their day-to-day basis that may interfere with your duty and obligation to preserve.
Now, I know this slide has a lot of stuff on it, but as someone who worked in the technology industry and in the information management industry, I love this. Because it is the tool. You can use this slide. I mean, take it, it's online, you can download it however you want. If you have a corporate client, they've got horrible data management techniques or horrible data management practices, show the executives this slide. Because the corporation anymore, sorry, I'm going to come down and walk lunch, y'all. Not really, but I will. So this slide shows how information management can generate a profit for the corporation. I mean, your data, your corporate client's data, or your client's data, doesn't matter if it's corporate client, that data has value. It does have value. Information is power anymore. The information about their customers, about what they're doing, knowing what each part of the corporation is doing, adds value to the corporation. And that adds to profit. So you have here, you have the different items. You have value, you have duties, and you have assets. So information can create value for the company, and that creates profit for the company because they understand how things are working better. Additionally, that integrates with the privacy and security because that is risk. How well does your company keep track of the data? How well does it keep it safe from hackers? I mean, we've all seen the news stories about how Target or Best Buy or whomever was that hackers and gets hold of their clients' credit card information. That's information security, and that is a big risk for your clients. The efficiency. Do they have a good IT department? Do they manage their IT assets efficiently? That also drives value. And then what information is important? Not all information is created equally. There's some information that's important, there's some information that's trivial. The information that is important, that creates value. And if you store it and you keep track of it well, that creates value. And one of the parts of that is making sure to discuss with your clients their automatic destruction procedures. Because they don't necessarily need to keep everything. And it's going to be different from industry to industry. I mean, banks have duties to hold on to information that, for example, a store doesn't. And so, know what the duty to preserve is within an industry. Banks are different, insurances are different, hospitals are different, stores are different. Know what that is, because that'll help. Now, there's a difference between privacy and security risk and risk management. We could talk about that for a long time, but leave it be said, it's something that you can talk about. And you've got legal risks as well. And the legal risks and the risk management, that creates duties to preserve data. And that talks about the retention procedures, the destruction procedures, whether or not they're preserving data that they know in the pre-litigation aspect is going to be important. That all plays into it. And so, the duty to hold and discover, that can decide whether you
breached identification. Rule 26, as you know, requires a party to identify all ESI within its possession, custody, and control to support any defenses or claims in a lawsuit. In my opinion, I could be wrong, this is probably the most important part of the EDRM process, other than preservation. Because how can you preserve something if you don't even know where it is? It makes kind of sense. So, the reason why I think it's so important is, especially with electronic data, is you really need to bring everyone in to the process to figure out what data is there, what's potentially relevant, where is it at, how do we manage that, and how do we quarantine it when preservation needs to occur. And this happens with both your client and your opposing client. When you're meeting with your client and talking about where their data is, how they use their data, they're probably going to have a pretty good idea of the other side as well. So make sure that you ask them the direct questions because it's going to help you with your case in identifying the data on the other side. And again, remember what goes around comes around. If you're going to request some things, make sure that you're doing your due diligence on your side as well. And this kind of goes back to the early case assessment that we talked about earlier. This is where you're writing down, maybe creating your own data map, or maybe identifying the key custodians that may have the hot documents, either to help your case or that you may have to disclose in the long run. It's good to document everything. I think of the one word that I can use the most today is document, 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 or defensible. But they go hand in hand. Make sure that there's a purpose for everything and write down your thoughts, write down why you did it. Because as we know, eDiscovery, there's not one right way to do it. As long as you're making your reasonable decisions. So make sure you're documenting while you're identifying. It'll help you in the long run and organize your case moving forward. Because if you reach a point in your analysis, you're looking through the data, and you think to yourself, wait a second, we've missed Susie in human resources, and she's actually a big part of this case. Or this company fired someone 2 weeks prior, and their laptop's sitting in IT getting ready to be reallocated. There are some things where you might need to go back. Let's see. And Bob and I didn't discuss this. I added this to my notes. How often, or maybe raise your hand if you frequently use the Rule 30b-6 corporation deposition. You guys use that on a regular basis? I mean, I'm not a practicing lawyer, but to me, if you're running into issues with getting information from the other side about how the companies run, how they store their data, and just the generalities, to me, that is the best vehicle to get that information and just get over the whole calling, emailing, and not getting the data that you want. But that being said, when you're meeting with these people and identifying, think in the back of your mind who your 30b-6 person is going to be for that company. And make sure that you have someone that is knowledgeable about the data.
Well, and as to the 30b-6, sometimes we hate to go there. When we as attorneys get into fights about discovery, and sometimes you end up with discovery about discovery. And you can use the 30b-6. You can have a corporate designee as to the information storage practices. You can have a corporate designee as to the data storage practices. And you can depose them to make sure that you understand how that data is, where it's at. And, yeah, you're going to have a fight about it, but that is something that you can do. And that can be helpful, especially when you may be dealing with, assets that are dispersed over many different areas in a lot of different forms. And, the other side, the other attorney might not know it either. So sometimes doing the corporate designee a 30b-6 of someone who is an IT knowledgeable person can help both sides actually discover and figure out where the data is at and how do we get it, and how do we minimize the burden. Because that 30b-6 can be useful not just from the plaintiff's perspective or the discovery party's perspective, but it can also be helpful from the responding party's perspective. Because that 30b-6 can help you folks figure out where the heck stuff is at. And importantly, from the responding party's perspective, it can help you figure out, or help you at least describe, why something is burdensome. And why it's overly broad, and why it's going to be very difficult and expensive for us to produce saw in the deposition, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. This is how much it's going to cost in order to do that. And all of a sudden, boom, your resistance by burden is made for you. So it can only help both sides.
And one last part about identification. Don't forget about the outside data. Don't forget about what a third party might have. Don't forget about, if the company does allow BYOD or at-home working, where personal devices are commingling that work data. Make sure you're thinking about that and ask those questions and make sure that you don't accidentally leave out something that the other party might ask for down the road and you accidentally forgot to even ask your client about it. Obviously, don't forget about social media. It plays its part, certainly.
The big thing is once you have a triggering event, you have duties and obligations to your client and the court. And that duty to preserve potentially relevant ESI or electronically stored information, at least according to some courts. That is a duty not owed to the other side, not owed to the other party. It's a duty owed to the court. Federal rules require us to keep that ESI available. That's reinforced in the Zublake opinions of Zublake 4. There are 4 of them, actually there are 5. But in Zublake 4, that's a duty held in there. Now with preservation, there is, under Rule 26, the issue of proportionality, and that's something we don't necessarily talk about, is that what is the proportionality of storing this information? What is the benefit of storing this information? What is the benefit of turning it over? And is the cost of doing that, or is the burden of doing that, proportional to the value that it's going to provide? And we don't do a lot of that proportionality analysis, and we probably need to do that a little bit better. And I know I need to probably do a little bit better. And I think I think the proportionality issues with the upcoming rules, with the rule changes, with the rule modifications, proposed rule modifications, I think that's going to be a problem, and I think it's going to be something. One of the reasons why I don't think the new rules are going to go into effect right away, because their analysis, the new rules analysis of proportionality, I think needs to be tweaked a little bit, or else it's just going to cause us all problems. And that's also embodied in the South Dakota Rules Professional Ethics. Is that we have to be fair to the opposing counsel and to the opposing party, and that's just can't reinforce or reemphasize how important it is.
In addition, in the preservation aspect, how do you do it? How do you preserve? I mean, it seems like there's a ton of data, there's a bunch of different computers, there's a file server. I mean, what's the most appropriate way to preserve something? There's not one answer to that, unfortunately. It's on a case-by-case basis, and once you've identified and you understand how people and how companies handle their data, understanding how to preserve will help present itself. With cell phones, usually the best way is to take it out of service and set it aside. It's difficult to just extract a couple of different things from it. So cell phones, those are pretty